If you got your donuts and your coffee. My name is Lisa Lacona. I am the speaker here today. How many people are new? Oh, I've got a lot of new people. This is awesome. Thank you for coming and joining us. The schedule is on the back there. The bathrooms are through the doors there. And the only other thing you need to know is that after this first talk, we have a quiet time. We call it hushed silence. And so if you need to talk, you whisper. If you need to walk, you tiptoe. And it's just a way for us to absorb what we've heard, because once we have heard the story of a life, the life of a saint, it's so great to spend a little time and think about where we're touched, or maybe where we have questions, and even some things that we're challenged by. So that's what we'll do right after this, and then we will reconvene. We will have questions and discussion before we have our meditation and then prayer in the chapel. This is a very exciting talk today. I have to say that it was challenging for me because I had a really crazy week. And I have a crazy week this coming week. So before I jump into the talk, I'm just going to tell you a few things that are going on, both places where I'm ministering and then other people, so that we're all in the loop. First of all, I want to really strongly invite all of you to a talk that's going to be happening here at St. Bernard's in a week and a half. It's our annual Otto Schultz lecture. And if you're not an academic, that probably sounds like a super heavy duty kind of lecture, but this is a talk that's being given by Father Richard Veras, who is a priest of the Diocese of New York, Archdiocese of New York, and he's a good friend of mine, and he's wonderful. He's very down to earth, I would say a beautiful, humble man, and he's got just a really great line on spirituality, and so I highly recommend that people attend this talk. You have to sign up online, though. That's the only thing. You can't just walk in like we do walk-ins here, because we have a little reception here beforehand, but feel free to come. There will be mass, there'll be a reception and a talk. Next thing is that I am doing a talk next week at Holy Apostles, so if you're like dying to have more of this stuff, you can join me at Holy Apostles for a Saturday morning talk. Also, I'm starting a new discussion group for women. It's going to be on Pope Francis's encyclical Dilexit Nos, which is on the human and divine love of Jesus Christ. This is a spiritual discussion group, so it's not an academic group. You don't have to read in advance. You don't have to prepare any papers. So there's a sign up for that in the back. If you're interested, just put your name and email, and I'll get with you. Lastly, we have new cards for next year. So saints for next year are slated. I'm taking a couple months off. Next year, those of you who have been with me know that we've been doing this straight for 2 years. So I decided that there's a couple moments in the semester when life is super tough, and maybe we could pause the Saints retreats, but still going to be as wonderful as ever. And then I am happy to come to your parish. So if you want me to come and do a talk at your parish, we have a series here through St. Bernard's. So if you're like, I really need to hear a Saints talk in April, then we can work that out. Okay, so that's all that's going on these days. Saint Andre Bessette. This was a very exciting saint for me to prepare, because I've never spoken or taught on him. But as a child, I remember my father talking about him a lot. Actually, he was Blessed Brother Andre at that point. And my father was one of those people. He's really a generation ahead of my mom, so he was the great generation, right? And he was one of these people that was very touched by the stories that he heard and knew people that had experienced healing. So he would talk about Blessed Brother Andre when I was little. Now, of course, he's Saint Andre. He was canonized in 2010. And he's very special to us in North America because he is the first Canadian-born man to be canonized. So it's these saints whose shrines we can actually visit, who lived in our time, in our space, they're very special to us. Andre was born into very poor circumstances. He was, and I have to just apologize this time. I'm going to be using my notes a little more than normal because this is the first time I'm doing a talk on Andre. But he was born. His parents were, poor French Canadians, very, very poor, Catholic, devout, big family. Okay. When he was born, he was so frail that they quickly baptized him, like right as soon as he was born. And it was so fast, the baptism, that they weren't even sure if it was a real baptism. Like nobody could, it was kind of in a moment it was an emergency baptism. So the next day he was still alive and his parish priest conditionally baptized him because they weren't sure if the first had taken, right? Just simply because it had happened so fast and people didn't really know if all the conditions were met. So that's how frail he was, and he was frail his entire life. He was a sickly, small child, never, even as an adult, never grew above 5 feet. And big family. His father does a lot of different kinds of jobs to sustain the family, but eventually gets into doing logging. And it was while he was cutting a tree down when Andre was 10 years old that Andre's father died. He was killed and crushed by a tree that he was chopping down. And so Andre lost his father at 10. The experience so traumatized his mother that she became sick. And because the family was so poor, she immediately had to farm out different children to different relatives. This wasn't an unusual thing. And but Andre, who was her frailest child, did stay with her. So he was with her as she got sicker and sicker from tuberculosis, and she died 2.5 years later. So at the age of 12, this young man is an orphan. Now, it's important to realize, and we're going to come back to this in the meditation, that Andre Bessette was raised in a very beautiful and special environment, and one that we should enter this environment insofar as we can. And that is the environment of the Holy Family. In Canada, if you go and look this up online, the Holy Family devotion in the church really began in Canada among French immigrants. The saints that we know, like Maria of the Incarnation, they promoted the French who came to this country and became saints. They promoted the devotion to the Holy Family. Why? Because you have these Catholic settlers, and they're coming from France where there's churches aplenty, and they come to a land where churches are scarce, right? Priests are scarce. And it was seen as a way to help people realize that God had not abandoned them, right? God, maybe there's no church up the street because there isn't even a street. You're in the middle of nowhere, right? But God is always with us. And God came to live in a human family. And so the devotion to the Holy Family was a way for lay persons to discover Christ's presence, Mary's presence, Joseph's presence in their circumstances, right? It's where God is with me where I'm at. He's not just in the church. He's not just with the priest, right? He's with me where I'm at. So this would have been part of his upbringing, and his mother was a very, very devout woman and certainly would have did communicate this to Andre. From this very early age, he developed a very deep devotion to Saint Joseph. And as you know, probably from his story, that's really the thing that carries him through his entire life. He begins to pray to Saint Joseph. At this time, he's a young teenager. He actually is living with an aunt, but at a very young age, he's like, no, I want to work. I want to support myself. I don't want to be a burden to my family. And he goes through a series of jobs. And one of the interesting things that happens is when he's on a farm, he's working on a farm, the farmer keeps running into him in the barn, and he's praying. He's praying in the barn, kneeling down with his arms outstretched. Now, I'm going to tell you, when a person prays like that, they have received a gift from the Lord, because that's not normal. It's not normal for teenage boys to be, even devout teenage boys, to be in the barn for hours at a time praying like that. So he is having an encounter with God through this devotion that has grown in his life. he continues to try to find work. This was an amazing fact that I discovered in my research. I think I wrote it down. He tried in his young life 36 different trades. He was, and when you go in there, a cobbler, a baker, a tinsmith, a blacksmith, tried everything. He was so small. He was very frail. He had a very, very delicate constitution. He found it very hard to keep food down, okay? And it seems, this is me speculating, that became part of it's his suffering, but also his gift to God, because he started refusing food because he realized they couldn't keep it down. So it kind of became like fasting, but you know what? It became what he was giving back to God, who was already, by the way, already at this point giving him so much. He left Canada for a while. He came into New England, right? He lived in New Hampshire. He lived in Connecticut. He was traveling around Vermont, going to these different mills. This would have been at the time of the Civil War. And he was trying to get work in the mills that were producing things for the war. Eventually, though, he returns to Canada because, like I said, he's very frail. He's really basically never successful when he takes on a job. He's just too weak. You know, this is a time when you have to be a strong man to do these jobs. There's no automation, right? There are no buttons to push. In 1867, he's 22, and he returns to Canada, and he once again is looking for jobs. He works for a priest, then he works for a farmer. And at a certain point, one of these people goes to their pastor, actually he's a farmer, goes to his pastor and says, you've got to start paying attention to this young man. And this man, the priest, is Andre Provençal. He was a devout man himself. And when he really starts to talk to Andre and to be close to him. Oh, by the way, I should tell you, his name was Alfred at this time. Andre was his religious name, so Alfred was his given name. He talks to him, and he starts to realize, there's something happening with this kid. He has a really, really intense, beautiful, mature life of prayer. So he talks Alfred into checking out religious life, and he suggests the Holy Cross Fathers. The Holy Cross is an order that has just been founded, really like 30 years earlier in France by Father Basil Moreau. They've already sent people to the New World, to Canada, and they have a school. They have a little school. So he goes and he visits them and applies to be a brother. Okay, now there's no way he could have ever been a priest. Andre Bessette had a very, very minimal education. He could read, but he could not write beyond writing his own name. So he was very minimally educated, but he asks to be a brother. Father Andre, who sent him, when he sends him, basically gives this word, I am sending you a saint. Like, take this guy. He's the real deal, right? But there is a bump, okay? He is received. He's received, but when it comes to actually professing vows, so they take him in like as a novice, right? We'll take you in, we'll train you. But when he gets to the point of being a novice, they're very concerned. The Holy Cross superiors are very concerned because he is so sickly. And they think to themselves, how will he ever, it's cruel to make someone take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience if they really can't live them, right? And this is he's really very infirm. But Alfred, right, he hasn't taken the name Andre yet. He is so determined to do this at this point that he goes to the bishop and he basically begs. He says, I need to enter this form of life. And the bishop, who has a really strong connection with the Holy Cross Fathers, ends up going to them and basically saying, you're going to take this guy. You're going to take this guy. The novice master, who has a certain amount of wisdom, looks at him and says, look, well, if he can't do anything else here, he can at least pray. He can pray, okay? So he becomes Brother Andre. He is a Holy Cross brother, and the job they give him that he will have for the next 39 years of his life is to be the doorman, the porter, right? He is assigned to the Collège de Notre Dame, which is a little boys' school / novitiate for the order, Okay, and by the way, yes, this is the same order that founded the University of Notre Dame. That's our American way of saying Notre Dame. But they have, at this point, I actually don't know what year, I should know what year Notre Dame was founded, but right now we know for sure they have this little Collège de Notre Dame in Canada. And he is actually their only saint, canonized saint, the Holy Cross Fathers. So he's made the doorman. He has this position for 39 years. What does he do? Well, he welcomes people at the door. He lets people in. And this, by the way, this is not like a monastery. This is a college, or, really it's a school for boys, and then a novitiate for the order. So it's not quite the same as being a porter in a monastery, but similar in the sense that he is supposed to be humble. He is supposed to be welcoming. He's supposed to make sure that people do not leave disappointed, right? Their needs are met. He has lots of other menial tasks, sweeping the floor, cleaning up, keeping things in order. He also does haircuts for the boys. That's going to come in a little bit later. That's one of his jobs. He cuts hair for the students. Very soon after Andre became a brother, we have the first reported healing that comes through his intercession. And one of the interesting things I did when I was reading was I kind of dug around to look for some stories about him. And one of the interesting stories that I heard, actually, it was fun to read it because it's a healing before the healing, right? Because there was a brother who was healed when Brother Andre rubbed some oil from St. Joseph's lamp on his diseased knee. And this brother wrote it up. He wrote a story about it. And he wrote up some other healings, and that got published. And that's when everybody discovered something's going on with this young man. But even before that, there were things that were happening. One of the very first reported stories, that I'm telling this one because I think it really tells you a lot about him, was that he was walking through the infirmary of the school. And there was a boy who was very sick, like very seriously sick. And they were very concerned about him. And he was Brother Andre was making his rounds, doing the things he did, like clean up and stuff. He wasn't an infirmarian, by the way. So he sees this boy who is just very, very ill. And he just looks at him and says, "What are you doing, lazy bones? Get up and go play with the others." And the little boy got up and went to play with the other boys. Okay? So everybody's thinking something's going on. And like I said, eventually he starts doing things. Now, all of his work centered on the person of St. Joseph. St. Joseph. When Brother Andre, one of the things that the thing he is famous for is his intercession to St. Joseph. And he insisted that when anything happened through him, it was not him. It was St. Joseph and God through St. Joseph. So he wasn't even really the middleman. He was just the guy who held the door for St. Joseph to do his work, right? What started happening was, like I said, a couple healings happen, word gets out, it's in the press. All of a sudden, and this is total word of mouth, right? This is 1800s, this is not, there ain't no internet, and there isn't even as much press as you would think, because we're still Canada is still a fledgling nation as we are, but people start hearing about it. It's a word of mouth thing. And they start coming to visit him, coming to the door of this college and saying, we want to talk to Brother Andre. I have something to talk to him about. I have something that I need to be healed of. When these people start coming, he's very consistently, like I said, referring to St. Joseph. He would go to the lamp. There was a statue of St. Joseph in the chapel there, and he would go to the lamp that was always lit in front of the statue, and he would get some of the oil from the lamp, and he would rub it on people. He'd say, we got to get a little bit of that St. Joseph. So he also had medals, St. Joseph's medals that he would give to people and say, well, press that on your leg, press that on your side, wherever people were hurting. And so there start to be a lot of healings. I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing. A lot of healings happen. People, it's a very simple, it's so radically simple, it's hard to believe, right? There isn't a lot of conversation. There isn't, often he tells, people you should pray. He counsels people to go to confession, right? Sometimes he tells people they're going to be healed and they come back and they aren't healed. And then he says, well, do this and do something different. Here's a medal, press this medal on it, right? Sometimes they have to come back many times. Sometimes they aren't healed. They aren't healed. And he blesses them, he prays with them, and he encourages them to trust in God. Trust in God. So he's a miracle worker, but he's not like a dispenser. It's not magic. Okay, it's not magic. God is in charge here all the time. But when they are healed, and happens quite a bit, it's quite extraordinary, right? If you've been up to the oratory, I haven't, so I have to be honest about that. I have not been to St. Joseph's Oratory, but you can go online and see all the pictures of the crutches that were left there by people who were healed by Andre Bessette. There are many, many, many thousands of verified miracles that happened. And it's really fun to see because a lot of them have this quality that was in that very first healing where he just is so certain of God's power that he doesn't even really get that involved with the person. His interactions last for a minute. In fact, later on when he was having thousands of people come, they said he would see 40 or 50 people an hour. So it was, come in the door, pray with you, maybe bless you with some oil, and that was it. And a lot of people would hobble in the door on crutches, and he would just walk up to them, take the crutches from them, and say, you can go home now. Right? So it's that simple, okay? There are many healings where he didn't even look to see if the person was healed, right? It was not his business in a way. And actually, that's one of the fascinating things about Andre Bessette. Actually, it's a very good teachable thing. When I first got into my research with Andre Bessette, I was writing for Magnificat. And one of the things that I did in that work was I would always go deeply into what made this person like me, right? I was not interested in a saint, frankly, until I discovered something that made them like me, right? If they were just a plaster saint, a porcelain saint, and everything was perfect and they were amazing, and I would feel there's no point of contact. Saints are human beings. They're human beings. So the people who write about the stories of the saints don't do us any service when they cover up aspects of their personality that are not as attractive. I came across something that talked about how he would lose his temper. And I was like, I got to dig around into this, right? And I did. And one of the things that used to happen was if someone accused him of healing them, or accused him, maybe that's not the right words, would say to him, you've healed me, he would get angry. And sometimes he would really lose it with people and yell at them. And he would say, it is not me. It is St. Joseph, God through St. Joseph. And there are many occasions when he got so angry, he had to leave the room, cool down, settle down, come back and apologize to the person because he just lost his temper. I have to say, I was so helped by this because this man had a traumatizing childhood. There is no doubt about it. This is not an easy childhood. Holy Family or no Holy Family, he suffered a lot. And I thought to myself, the saints are just people. They have the same struggles, right? They have the same wounds. And this is what you see in that moment, okay? The saints they're not perfect. God is the one who makes things, who heals us. And even Andre Bessette was always on the path toward healing. He wasn't all the way there, right? But then think of this. Think of this. If you can be suffering with a temptation like losing your temper, and yet at the same time, God is healing you through healing people through you, what does that mean? What can he do through us? What can he do through us? He doesn't need you to be perfect before he uses you as an instrument for his work. He doesn't need us to be perfect. He just needs us to be faithful. And by the way, he perfects us. So we just have to trust. It's a work of trust. It's a process. It's a lifelong process. You know, there's that old joke that spiritual directors make. I've had it made to me lots of times. You know, you come in and you say, when is this suffering going to end? When am I going to conquer this virtue, this vice? When am I going to be different? When am I going to be better? And the spiritual director says, 10 minutes after you're dead. It's a joke, but it's not a joke, right? Because like if you spend your time thinking it's all about being perfect, plaster, porcelain saint, you wouldn't be Andre Bessette because he wasn't that way. That's not what makes saints. That is not what makes saints. Okay, so that's the healings. Let's talk about his other major work, which is the oratory. And look at this. We have this beautiful picture here, right? Beautiful picture of the oratory. How many people here have been to the oratory? Oh my gosh, well, you guys should be giving this talk. I hope to hear from some of you. Tell me a couple things about the oratory. Just a couple words. Just give me some words to describe it. You can call them out.
Huge.
Huge.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple.
The little chapel is still behind there, and you can go to the little chapel that he lived in.
That's right. Okay, that's good news. I need to know that for when I get there. Anything else?
There's a hallway with different images of the litany of Saint Joseph, and each image has candles you can light.
That's beautiful. Wow. A place to pray. Thank you.
His heart is displayed too.
His heart is there. This is great.
They have a museum set up with the life of Brother Andre. And
Wonderful.
his little office over at Holy Cross at the college where he met people.
So there's a museum with his life, and also, I'm just repeating it for everybody, and then his office where he slept at Holy Cross, because he had a little office right next to the door where he slept on a bench. Anything else? That's amazing. That tells us a lot. It makes us all want to go. I think we have to plan a pilgrimage. So the oratory, how does that get started? Well, across from the college where he is working, there is a hill, a wooded hill. And even before it belongs to the Society of the Holy Cross, they eventually buy it. But even before they buy it, he is looking at that hill saying, I think St. Joseph wants something to be built there. In fact, one of the stories is that he had a statue of St. Joseph and he put it at the window looking at the hill. So he can start to do his work, right? And so eventually the congregation does buy that, and they have, pretty soon after that, he convinces them, or he tells them, I want to build an oratory. Now, oratory just means a place to pray, okay? It's not even a chapel. And they say there's no money for that, right? So what does he do? He starts saving, he gets charges 5 cents per haircut, okay, for the boys. And I'm sure that money went right back into the order, but he asks his superior, can I take that money and put it in a little account, right? So they say yes, and somehow the 5 cents gets to be $200, and that's enough money to start the building of the oratory. People start donating stuff, right? They start donating things. So then they build this little oratory, okay, that can hold 10 people. The first time they have an event there, 100 people show up. And very soon after that, they have an event, and 7,000 people show up for this event at the oratory that holds 10 people. And you can see this. You go online, you can see pictures of the tiny little oratory, right? And they're saying Mass in this tiny little niche of an oratory, and then all the people that are surrounding it, right? So obviously, this is partly due to his reputation, but for Andre, it was always about St. Joseph. St. Joseph needs to be honored. He needs to be honored. We need to pray to him, right? And so the oratory becomes, a big work because it just keeps growing. Finally they build a little church. Then it has to be expanded over a very short time, less than 10 years. They have to enlarge it 4 times. And then finally the order says we need a basilica. We need a real basilica. And they start asking for donations. They get lots of money. They actually start the work on that. What happens, of course, is life intervenes, right? So now we're about the time of the First World War. There's a pause in that work because of the war. The order is giving its money to the Red Cross. It's supporting the care of those people who are being hurt in the war or being injured in the war. And then that ends. They get back to work on the basilica, and they're building this basilica. And then the Great Depression hits, right? And they have to stop again because they run out of money. After the Great Depression, this is kind of a famous event by this time they've actually got the walls, right, of a gigantic basilica built, but they don't have it finished. There's no roof on it. They have the dome is just fleshed out with timber, right? It's not built. So, and the order is wondering, what are we going to do? Because we've just come out, the country's just come out of a depression. How will we finish this huge church? And, all this time, of course, Andre has been there. The whole time during the building, he's actually living at the oratory, he's healing people, and he visits the work site every day. Doesn't direct anything, just shows up. He's a constant presence the entire time this is happening over decades. But at this point, everybody's wondering what's going to happen. And he has a simple answer. He says, well, it's St. Joseph's work. If he wants it built, if he wants a roof over his head, he's going to have to do it. So he sets up a procession, takes a statue of St. Joseph, and he takes it right into that gigantic structure. Like I said, it's got all the walls are up, no roof. And puts St. Joseph in the middle. And what do you know? Next week, all the money is donated to finish the structure. And they were able to finish the oratory. The oratory was not finished until Andre himself had already passed away, right? But he was able to see that the conclusion was coming through the intercession of St. Joseph. So his life, really, in all of that time, is just a continuation of everything I told you. It's prayer to St. Joseph, praying with people, healing them, getting a big church built. All of it is happening in miraculous ways, in extraordinary ways. And of course, he's a presence. He's a presence. What do I mean by that? He's all around there. People are always coming to see him. If he gets away, he does start to get away. And actually, towards the last couple of decades of his life, his superiors were like, you probably need to go away for twice a year because he's constantly meeting with people. And he would leave. And when he went someplace else, of course, the word would get out. And the second he got off the bus, the second he got off the train, he was inundated. And people would be interviewing him and bringing the sick, and there'd be newspapers. So this is how my dad knew about Blessed Brother Andre. Like, everybody knew about him, right? Everybody knew about him. So all the way to the end of his life, he is simply doing what God has given him to do in this very humble, quiet way, always pointing to St. Joseph and always to God. And so at a certain point, he wears out, just like the rest of us. He's in his 90s, 91 years old. He becomes sickly, and he leaves this world in a very simple and beautiful way. I want to read to you his final words because I just thought it was so beautiful. Just got my page here. As he's lying on his deathbed, I don't actually know what he died of. Does anybody know what he died of? What the actual? I think he was quite old. So he was very frail. I don't know what was failing in him. He's 91. But he was suffering. He was crying out in pain. And he would say, "Oh, how I suffer, God, my God. Oh, how I suffer, God, my God." So just praying on his deathbed. And then, at the very end, his voice became very soft and weak. And he said, "A little grain. A little grain, the grain of wheat." This is John 12:24. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So the last image in Andre's mind is this image of this tiny grain of wheat that is dying. And when it dies, it will bear much fruit. I'm going to leave that with you now because I want you to think about this. That wasn't just his image that he was given on his deathbed for what it is to die, but isn't this the way he lived his entire life? He was the littlest man, frail, uneducated, a failure, the smallest, the lowest of the low. And yet in his own life, he saw what kind of fruit God can bring from our littleness, right? Extraordinary fruit. When Andre Bessette died and the word got out, they put his body out. They laid his body out so that people could come and reverence, and pray in front of it. And over the course of a week, over 1 million people came. Over 1 million people. We're talking 1937, right? They came and they spent their time with him. They prayed with him. They thanked him. And they praised God for his life. Okay, that's that little grain of wheat. 1 million people were touched by him. And we know many more, right? Because here we are, right? Okay, let's just take all this in right now. Let's spend the next 10, 15 minutes in hushed silence. And then when we get back, I want to hear from some of you.